While our garden looks lush and green now, a year ago almost nothing was growing here. It was a pretty overwhelming and devastating experience, but eventually we realized that we had accidentally contaminated our garden with herbicide-tainted mulch and compost. Based on the overwhelming response that we're getting to our social media posts about this, it sounds like a lot of other people are experiencing it as well. So we decided to make this video to tell you that all hope is not lost. Hey there neighbors, welcome to Wild Homestead Living. I'm Julie, and in today's video we're going to tell you how we accidentally poisoned our garden, how we figured that out, and what we did to fix it, and hopefully give you tips that will prevent you from ever having this experience yourself. Let's get started. So before I dive into the whole story of what unfolded with our poisoned garden drama, let me give you a little bit of background on our homestead. After nearly 2 decades of living in urban rental units and doing our best to homestead in that context, we moved out here to the country in 2018. We were able to buy a little less than 2 acres in the Snoqualmie Valley of Washington State, but all it had was a house and a shed. And it was really all we could afford because of this giant septic mound that I'm standing on right now. It took us about 2 years to save the money to build the garden that you see behind us, and also that delay was partly due to complications from my breast cancer. When we finally got the garden in, it was late August and we were rushing to get some seeds planted so we could have a little bit of a garden in the off season, which is the fall and the winter. That garden did pretty well, but after many years of gardening, I knew that more was possible. And I also knew that the secret to a really good garden is good soil. So in March of 2021, I did a soil test, and I had it analyzed by professionals who could really tell me what we needed to do to maximize the abundance of our next harvest. I got 2 green thumbs up, and so we decided that the only things that we really needed to add were some compost and mulch. Little did we know that the very things we were bringing into our garden to improve the soil, which were horse manure-based compost and locally produced straw for mulch, may have been the very things that introduced herbicide contamination into our soil. You know, looking back, the signs that something was wrong were there from the start. If you start to pay attention and listen to your plants and observe them, you can tell when things are going wrong. And right from the beginning, the seeds that we started outside and that we started inside, and the transplants we were bringing in from other places, weren't thriving. Sometimes the plants would start to grow and then they'd just stop, or they'd wither and die. But the real signal that something was very, very wrong was when our tomato starts were growing and then became extremely deformed. So I have to admit, at that point, I had some pretty dark moments scrolling through social media and seeing other people whose gardens were doing well and feeling sorry for myself after decades of hoping and dreaming to finally have my own homestead, nearly dying of cancer, getting my dream come true only to watch it wither and die. But once I got over my disappointment, Kevin and I went back to our backgrounds. We're both scientists, and we started to get curious about uncovering the mystery of exactly what was going wrong in our garden. With gardening, there can be any number of reasons that things fail to thrive. So we decided to use a process of elimination to figure out what might be contributing to our garden issues. Number 1, was it seeds? We felt confident that wasn't it because we've worked really hard to find ethical seed suppliers that provide seed adapted to our bioregion. Was it weak transplants? We felt pretty confident that wasn't the problem either because we were growing our own, or we were buying them from local gardeners and nurseries that had done a really good job of growing healthy baby plants. 3, could it be fluctuations in temperature of the air or a watering system? Maybe, but we felt confident that that wasn't the primary issue because both indoors in our very controlled environment and outside in the garden, things were not going well. The 4th and final factor that we considered was, could it be our soil? That's the one we came to last because the previous season our garden had done pretty well. But we started to think about what had changed, and we had brought in those amendments of compost and mulch and started to wonder if they could be contributing to the problems we were seeing in our plants. So once we started to suspect that the issues were from our soil, I went into major research mode. I did deep dives into reading toxicology reports and chemical company websites and government agency reports, and learning from other gardeners who were experiencing similar challenges. There were two people in particular that really helped me realize that we could be experiencing herbicide damage, and those people were Charles Dowding in the United Kingdom, who's written extensively about issues with tainted horse manure compost, and Jill Winger, who's in the United States, and she was posting pictures of little damaged tomatoes that looked just like the ones I was growing. In our research, we discovered that there's a relatively new family of herbicides on the market, and farmers have been using them since about 2005 on crops of straw and hay. These herbicides eliminate the broadleaf plants that are considered weeds, allowing the farmers to get a higher price for their crops. And they're also appealing because they're considered low toxicity, meaning that they don't persist in the bodies of fish and birds and mammals. As we started to research these herbicides more, we discovered something called herbicide carryover. What that means is that while they don't persist in the bodies of animals, they do persist in the environment. Now, the way that could look for us is, let's say that a crop of hay was sprayed with the herbicide to get rid of the broadleaf plants. A horse ate that and they pooped it out, and then it was composted. That herbicide could still be in the composted manure months or years later. Eventually that could come to me in my garden and still be present. The problem for home gardeners like us is that our plants that we like to grow, like tomatoes and potatoes and peas and beans, are all very sensitive to that herbicide. So even the smallest residue that comes into contact with our vegetables could cause those plants to become permanently damaged. At this point, we wanted to find conclusive evidence that herbicide poisoning was the primary issue in our garden. And we'd hoped that we could find a lab that would test our garden for that residue. Unfortunately, we were not able to find a lab in the US at that time that would do that level of testing. So we decided to perform our own test at home using something called a bioassay. A bioassay sounds really intimidating, but it's actually a very simple test you can perform at home. We did ours right here where we start our garden seeds every year indoors. If you're interested in the exact process, you can go check out the article that accompanies this video on our website, where we've got a link to the process that we used. Unfortunately, the results of our tests were inconclusive, but we still knew something was wrong in our garden. So we decided to proceed as if our soil was contaminated and take steps to remediate the problem. So at this point, you're probably wondering, what did we do to fix the garden? I'm going to go over that in detail now. The first thing I did was remove all of the straw mulch from the garden. I didn't want to put it in our compost pile because it could be contaminated. What I did was I spread it on our forest trail where we know we don't want plants to grow. Then I removed 50% of the soil from all of our raised garden beds. Now, I wish that we could have completely replaced the soil, but we just couldn't afford that, so we decided to take 50% of it out. Then I replaced that removed soil with high heat treated compost. In the process of my research, I learned that compost that's been treated at a very high heat for a long period of time breaks down any herbicide residue that may be present. Next, we added worm castings from our worm bin, and those are a nice natural fertilizer that also add a rich microbial environment that helps fight soil-borne diseases and toxins. Next, we added mycorrhizal fungi, and it's a granular powder that you sprinkle on your soil, and we did that to enhance and diversify the beneficial microorganisms that are present. Next, we added biochar, or activated charcoal, and that does a variety of things, including enhances soil structure, water absorption, fertility, and especially helps to absorb any toxins that might be present. Perhaps the most unusual thing we added was a liquid algae, and the reason that we did that is there were studies done at a high school in Montana that showed that that removed herbicide damage from the soil. And then from there, we've completely changed mulches. I'd really hope that we could continue to use straw, but it's just too much of a risk in the garden. So now we're using a variety of cardboards, newspapers, coconut coir, and even some old pea vines. There's strengths and weaknesses to each of those, but they're the only way we can guarantee that we're not bringing herbicide in. We made those changes slowly over a 7-month period from September to March. And although we've had an exceptionally cold, wet spring and early summer, our garden has dramatically transformed from what it looked like last summer. There's an overwhelming abundance now of delicious vegetables ready for the picking. So here's the advice that I wish that we had had before we started, and the things that you can do to avoid ever accidentally poisoning your garden. The really tricky one is to avoid straw and hay as much as possible. The reason this is tricky is because it can be persistent in lots of different types of compost, and the chemicals themselves can be persistent for a really long time. But if at all possible, avoid straw and hay. Find a source of high heat treated compost in your area. For us, where we are, that's Cedar Grove, but you can find this by looking into the websites of compost companies yourself. Our favorite is Start a Worm Bin, and we've got a video all about how you can do that at home. It's a fun and easy project that you can do whether you live in an apartment or on acreage in the country. You not only get composted food scraps for your garden, but you also get all that rich microbial environment as well. Whenever possible, use certified organic products. They are far less likely to have touched any kind of herbicide or pesticide contamination. And lastly, continue improving and nurturing your soil. Just like our own health, there's no one and done for the soil health in your garden. It's an ongoing journey that includes adding good nutrients, testing it, and modifying as you go. Well, it's summer now, and where last year at this time our garden was dying, it's now thriving. We were never able to determine for certain if it was herbicide damage, but we do know that all of the things we did to clean and remediate our soil had a huge positive effect. While I hope this has never happened to your garden and you'll never need this information, I also want you to know that there is hope, and it is possible to heal your garden if you're struggling. If you're interested in following our journey and learning more about sustainable living, we would love for you to subscribe to this channel and go check out our website, where we have lots of free resources available to you at wildhomesteadliving.com. And remember, there is no one right way to homestead, only the way that's right for you. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.